Hey friends, we're going to be testing another recipe from Claire Saffitz's cookbook, What's for Dessert. This is her all-purpose meringue, and we are going to be using this to make a mango lime topped pavlova. So this is the perfect solution for all the surplus egg whites that I had after making the tiramisu the other day. Without any further ado, let's get right into it. To start, I've got the bowl of my stand mixer completely oil-free. I cleaned this out with some white vinegar and let it air dry. To that, we're going to add our egg whites along with some kosher salt and cream of tartar. Pop on the whisk attachment, which is also cleaned with vinegar. We're going to beat this over low speed just for 30 to 45 seconds to get the kind of clumpy bits of the egg white homogenized. Now that the whites are homogenized, we can crank the speed up to medium and beat this until it gets kind of white and foamy instead of translucent and yellow. And this should take just about 45 seconds to a minute. That's been 1 minute exactly, and you can see this is nice and white and foamy. Now that we've got a little bit of structure started, we can crank this up to high and slowly stream in our granulated sugar. We're gonna do this super slow, so it's gonna be over the course of a few minutes. I sprinkled my sugar in over the course of 3.5 minutes. Now that it's all in there, we're going all the way up to high speed, and we're gonna beat this to stiff peaks, about 2 more minutes. It's been 1.5 minutes. Ooh. That is a nice stiff peak. All right, so that was just about 1.5 minutes on the stand mixer. If you're using a hand mixer, it may take a little bit longer. And real quick, we're just gonna beat in some vanilla extract. Now at this point, we are done with the stand mixer. We're gonna fold in the last ingredient by hand. And some sifted powdered sugar is the final ingredient. A wide, shallow bowl would have made this a bit easier, but we'll get it done. And I think that looks pretty well incorporated. When it comes to baking your pavlova, you've got a few options. You could do it freeform on a baking tray lined with parchment, just dump it out and spread it into an even disc of whatever size you want. Alternatively,
bake the meringue in a springform pan. It makes it really cake-like and to me feels like a little bit more kind of celebration focused.
I'm using a 10-inch springform pan that I prepared with parchment paper. I just brought the parchment all the way through and out the bottom so it's in there really securely. Then I applied a very thin butter belt to my parchment just to get it to stick to the pan here. You don't want any grease inside because that'll mess up our meringue. So we'll just scrape this all in there. Got about 2/3 of it in. I want to kind of zhuzh this around in the pan before finishing it off. That way I can make sure I get all the way to the edges. I'm trying to make sure that there aren't any big air pockets hiding inside of our meringue because obviously as this heats in the oven, those air pockets are going to expand and that could lead to some cracking and just general ugliness of the meringue. But I think that looks pretty good, so we will go ahead and finish off putting the meringue on here. And then with our spoon again, we'll just kind of zhuzh this around and make it a little swoopy and pretty. So it's really about finding the balance between having an even layer so that this bakes evenly and getting tons of nooks and crannies, just like an English muffin, to hold all of that delicious mango lime coulis at the end. I'm happy with how this is looking, so I'm going to pop it into our preheated 200-degree oven for 2 to 2.5 hours. We're kind of baking, but really just drying out the outside layers of the meringue so that we'll have a crispy outside and that marshmallowy inside. While the pavlova is baking, it's the perfect time to make our topping. So I'm doing a mango lime sauce to go on top. So here in my saucepan, I've got about 1 pound of frozen mango, along with the zest and juice of a full lime. And I remembered my lesson from the lime squiggle cookies I zested before juicing today. To balance the acidity of the lime juice, I'm gonna add in just a couple tablespoons of sugar. We're gonna cook this over medium heat for about 10 to 15 minutes, just until the fruit starts to fall apart. And stir every so often just to ensure nothing's burning. After 12 minutes, our mangoes are looking great. The texture here is very similar to a very chunky applesauce. We're gonna let this cool in the pan. The mango's been cooling for about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna transfer this to the jug of my blender. If you've got an immersion blender, obviously puree just directly in the pan. That'll make your life easier. Since I don't have one, I'm just gonna do it in the blender. That's just a little bit under 1 minute there, but wow, that texture looks amazing. Already the texture of this is really thick and luxurious, and it will continue to thicken as it hangs out in the refrigerator. So we'll set this aside until we're ready for it. Our pavlova baked for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and then I let it cool in the oven with the door ajar for about 45 additional minutes. As you may have noticed, it is the following day. Our original pavlova was victim of a little bit of cat curiosity during the cooling process. So we've got our fresh pavlova here, and we are ready to finish it off. To do that, we're gonna make some whipped cream with crème fraîche. So here in a bowl, I've got some fridge cold cream, and to that, adding in some crème fraîche. Sour cream would be a great alternative. And I'm just gonna mix this with the hand mixer until we get to a medium peak. So after 2.5 minutes, we are at a very soft peak. It really can't stand up on its own, and I think that looks great for a topping. So I'm just gonna cut a nice generous slice using my chef's knife here, and that's working pretty well. Then we'll top this off with a little of our whipped cream, plus a little drizzle of that mango lime sauce. Throw in some fresh raspberries and a little lime zest, and this looks pretty good. So this is my first time making pavlova. Overall, I think it looks similar to pavlovas I've seen online, so that's a good sign. Cutting it was a little bit difficult, but it wasn't a total disaster. It does appear to be maybe slightly underbaked in the center, so let's give it a taste. Ooh, big bite. Mmm. Wow. Ooh, the texture of that is really nice. It's a little bit crispy, crunchy, and then it quickly melts. Okay, so much firmer on the outside. Okay. The outside edge is also crispy, crunchy, as you would expect, but as you chew, it gets this kind of like sticky chewiness, like in a really good way. I quite like that. The crème fraiche and the whipped cream, total game changer. That little bit of tanginess is such a welcome break from everything that we've got going on here. The pavlova itself is very sweet. The mango is like sweet and tart, so we need something kind of like fatty, tangy, and it just works perfectly. So I would absolutely not skip that step. In terms of the pavlova overall, I have very mixed feelings. I definitely would not make it again like this. I think the springform pan was completely unnecessary. If you want a large pavlova, I would just plop it into a circle on a parchment lined baking tray and kind of spread it out and let it be a little bit more freeform. If you want to be really obsessive, you could pipe it on and, like trace a circle on the bottom of the parchment paper to give yourself a little bit of a guide. But adding in a springform pan just is a lot of headache with having to line it, and I don't have time for that. I don't want to work with a springform pan, so I would not recommend that. If I make the pavlova again, I would definitely do it as like individual, like single serving pavlovas. I think that would be cuter, plus it would be less messy than having to cut this big cake. It's not as much of a wow factor, but I think eatability, usability, is kind of also important when it comes to the recipe. It's very tasty. I'm glad I finally got to try pavlova, but if you make this one, I'm really curious what your experience is like. So please let me know in the comments down below. I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.